All right, first and foremost, I'd like to start off by giving all praises and glory and honor to Yahawah, BaHaSham, YAHAWASHI, BaHaSham Kodash, double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. A salutation to you brothers pushing his word in truth and sincerity. All right, back with another video. This is from shtfplan.com. It says the cost of money, coinage, fiat power, and the quiet corruption of value. All right, Justin M. P. Tech, May 15th, 2026. Now, this is an economic article. It says this article was published by Justin M. P. Tech at the Mises Institute. All right, fair use. All right, we're using this article as a demonstration, of how Esau Edom, all right, is in the negative when it comes to the scriptures. He's on a he's the wicked, all right, and basically how he uses his monetary system. Now, whole host of scriptures, scriptures pop into your mind, especially before you. I wanted to hit these scriptures. All right, let me see. Let's go to this one real quick. I'm gonna go to the book of Sirach. All right, I'm gonna go to the book of Sirach. I believe it's Sirach 10. Yeah, 10 and 4. All right, it says the power of the earth is in the hand of the Lord. Okay, right now he's giving the wicked the rulership. Job 9 and 24. Earth is given into the hand of the wicked. All right, but the earth is still in the power of the Lord. It says, and in due time he will set over it one that is profitable. All right, his son Yahawashi, in due season, okay, he will reign over the earth and be profitable. All right, I didn't really mean to do that, but he'd be profitable. Okay, he'll be profitable to the earth. The earth will be in righteousness. All right. It says, in the hand of the Most High is the prosperity of man, and upon the persons of the scribe shall he lay his honor. Bear not hatred to thy neighbor for every wrong, and do nothing at all by injurious practices. Pride is hateful before the Most High and man, and by both doth one commit iniquity. Now here's the point that I wanted to bring out. It says, because of unrighteous dealings, injuries, and riches got by deceit, all right, the kingdom is translated from one people to another. Okay. Now, riches got by deceit. The reason why I wanted to bring this article out, because when I was looking at this article, one thing came to mind as I, browsed through some of this article, and I'm going to go into it a little bit. Might read it all, might read it, might not. But the devaluing of the Roman currency, the denarius. Now we know that America is part of the last leg of the Roman Empire, which had the deadly wound and was healed. All right. Now, just as they devalued the Roman denarius, all right, the same symptoms are at the causes of, what's going on in Babylon, what we see today. Okay. Now, the devaluing of the Roman denarius, the denarius was Rome's primary silver coin from the late 3rd century BC until the early 3rd century AD, initially weighing about 4.5 grams and containing roughly 95% pure silver. It was the economic backbone of the republic and early empire, trusted for its intrinsic value and widely used in trade, taxation, and military pay. All right, so this was a denarius. That was the currency of Rome. All right, and it was well circulated throughout the known world in the areas of the Mediterranean Sea. All right, it says causes of devaluation. It says several factors drove the denarius decline in value. Massive military spending, maintaining a professional army required enormous resources. All right, and that's something that you see in Babylon, the massive military spending, the massive military budget. All right, that was one of the causes in Rome, massive military spending. It says debt and infrastructure projects. It says emperors like Augustus, Trajan, and Severus overspent on public works, wars, and personal projects, often financed by minting more coins than could be backed by silver. It says declining silver supply, mines in Spain. All right, there was. It says mines in Spain, Gaul, Britain, Asia Minor, and North Africa became depleted or disrupted by war. All right, those supply chains. All right, we see now political necessity. It says when revenue fell short, emperors chose debasement over cutting pay or raising taxes, which could provoke rebellion. Now you see more printing, all right, of the Federal Reserve note. Um, it says the process of debasement, and it goes into that. It says economic and social consequences. Inflation as silver content fell, the coin's purchasing power eroded, leading to rising prices and a loss of confidence in the currency. Okay, you're gonna start seeing that with the dollar. All right, you're seeing it with the dollar on the world stage. Okay, it says Grisham's law said bad money drives out good. It says people hoarded real goods, grain, gold, land, and spent debased coins, further destabilizing trade. Okay, so people were hoarding up goods. It says military unrest. It says soldiers whose pay was not worth less. It says was now worth less. Like it says begin demanding payment in kind or taking supplies from local. It says taking supplies from locals, weakening the army's loyalty and discipline. Political instability. The crisis of third century saw frequent changes in emperors, partly due to the inability to pay troops in honest coins. All right, so this is some history on the denarius. Now let's go into this article real quick. All right, let me read Proverbs 16 and 11. It says, a just weight and balance are the Lord's. All the weights of the bag are his work. Okay, all the weights of the bag are his work. You weigh, all right, treasures or gold, silver, which those are the work of the Lord. Those are creations that the Lord have given as money. So it should be just as the power that created them. All right, but you see what the wicked does. Okay, he corrupts them. All right. Proverbs 11 and 1. It says a false balance is abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. All right. And that's why back during the devaluing of the currency, all right, when they started devaluing the currency, it threw off the balance. That's why you have something called Gresham's law, which let's go into that. Let's read it into Gresham's law real quick. It says Gresham's law states that bad money drives out good money when both are in circulation at the same legal value but differ in intrinsic worth. All right. It says Gresham's law is an economic principle describing the tendency for less value currency, bad money, to circulate more widely, while more valuable currency, good money, is hoarded or removed from circulation. This occurs when two forms of money are accepted at legal tender at the same face value, but one has higher intrinsic value, such as coins made of precious metal like gold or silver. People naturally spend the cheaper money and retain the more valuable money for its intrinsic worth or potential future appreciation. All right. It's like those pennies. Now you see, people are looking to save pennies. People looking for pennies that are older, you know. But let's go into this article. It says there is nothing. It says there is something also. Slaki. It says there is something almost absurd about a government minting money at a loss. A coin, the most basic unit, becomes becomes instead a confession, not just of its inefficiency, but of a deeper fracture between what money is supposed to represent and what it has become. All right. It says the American penny collapsed under the weight 3.69 cents for every penny minted. So it costs 3.69 cents. How do you make 69 cents? I don't know. 4 cents. All right. For every penny minted. Thus, it costs multiples of its face value to produce. A financial contradiction sustained for years out of habit and political inertia, inertia, which inertia, a tendency to do nothing or to remain unchanged. Political inertia, they do nothing. It says now the nickel stands in the same position, costing far more to mint than it is worth. This is not a marginal accounting problem. It is a visible symptom of a system that is no longer disciplines itself. Okay, that's why, man, this money system is going to be done away with. All right, we telling you that Revelation 13 and 16 is going to come into play. And if you fall for the psychological operation that Esau Edom is going to bring during that time that we're talking about, which also in Revelation 3 and 10 it mentions the hour of temptation, all right, that shall come upon all the earth. The whole world is going to know this system, the MOTB. This is a global system that's coming to the world. All right. The systems that are now in place, all right, are becoming obsolete, or they're being played out just like old fashioned cars and the rabbit ears on the television, analog signal. All right, how they've done away with those things, right? Well, that's this money system, this current money system. All right, it says in any private enterprise producing goods, it says producing goods at 3 times their sales price would be unsustainable. In public finance, it persists year after year. The losses are absorbed, diffused across taxpayers, and hidden within a monetary system capable of expanding to cover them up. To cover them, yeah. All right, that's why people are waking up to the fact that this system is a scam. Everything now is a scam to everybody. Everything is a scam. All right, people waking up to say the government is a scam, that this lifestyle is a scam, democracy. Everybody's saying everything is a scam. All right, but this is the working of the Heavenly Father. All right, this is the working of Yahawah BaHaSham. All right, because we're at the end of this society. We're at the end of Esau rulership. All right, it says the question is not why it happened. Oh, Shlaki, excuse me, it's late. It says the question is not why it happens once. The question is why it continues. The answer leads directly to the structure of modern money and to the role of the Federal Reserve. Fiat currency is money by decree. It has no intrinsic value, no material anchor, no origination from market processes, no constraint beyond policy and confidence. That design offers flexibility, but it also removes the natural limits that once enforced discipline. When coins were made of silver or gold, their production costs impose a boundary. You could debase them as empires often did, which we read about, but not without consequences, which we showed you the consequences from the denarius. It says today the constraint is political. The constraint is political will, and that is far easier to erode. The result is a system where contradictions can persist indefinitely. A nickel can cost 13.78 cents to produce and still circulate as 5. The gap between cost and value does not force correction because value itself is no longer grounded in cost. It is declared, maintained, and defended by institutional authority. Basically, it's off balance. And these institutional authorities, they're the ones, all right, that are used to enforce and keep the guardrails set up so that the people stay within the confines of the system. All right. And it's collapsing. All right. It says historically, this gap has always been dangerous. In the later centuries of the Roman Empire, emperors reduced the silver content of the denarius until the coin became a thin veneer over base metal. The currency retained its face value in law, but not in substance. Prices rose, trust eroded, and economic life became distorted, which is happening now. This is the state responded not by restoring the integrity, but by enforcing acceptance. All right, in this case, they're going to bring that MOTB, and they're gradually changing it using the CBDC, central bank digital currency. All right, in whatever formats they're going to unroll it through. It says the United States has followed a more gradual version of this trajectory. The Coinage Act of 1965 removed silver. All right, note that the Coinage Act of 1965. It says it removes silver from everyday coinage, replacing it with cheaper metals. It was a practical decision in response to rising silver prices, but it marked a turning point. Money was no longer something with inherent worth. It became something defined entirely by fiat. So that's when America, around the time we always talk about America started collapsing around the 70s, but between, 1965 and the 70s, that whole era, you had the assassinations, that was a turning point and starting of the collapse of Babylon. All right. It says money was no longer something with inherent worth. It became something defined entirely by fiat. It says subsequently experiments only reinforced the shift. The 1974 aluminum cent experiment attempted to preserve the penny by altering its substance. The 1943 steel cent production replaced copper with steel during wartime shortages. Each move followed the same pattern. When reality pressures the system adjusts the material rather than the promise. Today, even the pretense is fading. It says the government no longer tries to align the cost of coinage with its value. It simply produces at a loss and continues. This is where inefficiency becomes corruption, not in the sense of hidden bribery or scandal, but in a structural sense. Incentives no longer reward correction. Politicians avoid eliminating coins because it appears trivial or risks public annoyance. Industrial stakeholders benefit from continued production. Bureaucracies preserve their mandates. No single actor needs to conspire. The system produces the outcome on its own. It says the Federal Reserve does not mint coins, but it makes this environment possible by managing liquidity, trying to absorb shock, and expanding the monetary base when deemed necessary. It ensures that losses never force systematic change. The discipline that would exist in a constrained system is replaced by a capacity unable to limit contraction. This is the defining feature of fiat money at scale. It can tolerate irrationalities at the margin because it controls the center. It can produce coins at a loss. expand credit beyond savings, and sustain asset prices discontinued from underlying value, all without immediate collapse. But tolerance, it is not the same as stability, it is a delayed mechanism. Hey, that's why this collapse is going to be so hard upon these people. And it was done by design. All right, it's going to be triggered, and the response is going to be that MOTB. We're heading into an economic, financial, world design catastrophe. All right, and it's going to come suddenly upon the people, and they're not going to feel. They're not going to even know it's coming. All right. Um, Let me get this real quick. This is the book of James 5:4. It says, matter of fact, I started one. It says, "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you." These elites, all right, they're going to be in such great misery, all right, especially when their first, hours of slavery, captivity, okay, misery, hardship, trouble, calamity, misery, all right, to the ones that wretchedness, to the ones that create wretchedness amongst these people, amongst the poor, that bring forth calamity, and they laugh at it, and they drink, and they make deals, and they profit off of it. All right, it's going to come a time where they're going to find their misery. And one of the ways they bring forth misery upon the poor is with through their monetary system. Okay, I'm not going to read the article, but I'm gonna end on this one. It says, your riches are corrupted. All right, everything, how they got their riches. All right, through the manipulation of the monetary system. Okay, the top elite. All right, and the control, and the buying, of different resources and businesses after these bubbles that they created by creating this system. You have bursting bubbles. Companies are up, evaluated, and these companies, they invest and they research. All right, and all of a sudden the company falls, and the elites buy the company, and they buy all the proprietary, patents, and all of that stuff that goes along with it, and that's how they prosper. That's one of the ways they prosper. All right, by accumulating companies and doing all types of wickedness. All right, it says, your riches are corrupted and your garments are moth eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasures together for the last days. All right, and that's how the Heavenly Father have set it up. All right, they heaped all the treasures together, and they get ready to. Hey, or the past, just the few episodes that we seen, uh, 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 C19, that was the biggest transfer of wealth, you know, and there's been multiple transfers of wealth, all right, from the average common citizen to the rich, to their corporations, all right, and all their businesses, all right. It says, behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, you defrauded them through the monetary system. All right, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. All right, so every time Jake, can't pay their bills, you have the righteous crying unto the Lord hears that. All right, you got Jake crying, they're crying to their whatever gods that they subscribe to in these days. All right, they don't cry to Yahawah BaHaSham, but the elect cry unto Yahawah BaHaSham. That's why we do these videos. All right, we know that we're being defrauded, through this system that's been set up, that we have been born into. All right. And we know that the Lord, at an appointed time, he's going to deliver us from this system, because it is an abominable system. All right. We know that the Lord is righteous. All right. The Lord is going to deliver the poor and the needy. All right. But I'm in a video here called Hello, Yahawah BaHaSham YAHAWASHI, BaHaSham Kakwadash, double honors to the elders and apostles of the great millstone. And salutation to you brothers pushing this word in truth and in sincerity. Until the next video, shalom.